Welcome to the Political Risk Podcast, where risk, insurance and geopolitics meet. I'm your host, David Benyon, and welcome to this special episode produced in association with Liberty Specialty Markets. Our subject matter for this special ep encompasses two topics: politically motivated sabotage in Europe and the risk of strikes, riots and civil commotion within overseas France. And to discuss these topics, I'm joined by two great guests from LSM's continental European political violence business. To speak about sabotage, Björn Reusswig is LSM's regional line and business manager for terrorism and contingency business in Europe, based in Cologne. Björn joined LSM in 2022, responsible for European P&L for terrorism and contingency lines. He began his commercial insurance career as an intern at Delvag, which is the captive insurer of airline Deutsche Lufthansa, developing theft prevention guidance for Lufthansa cargo. In 2004, he joined the European hub of Catlin Syndicate, creating a claims practice for its contingency business. In 11 years and several promotions while at Catlin, Björn specialised in terrorism and political violence insurance in Central Europe, working in Cologne, in Munich, and in London. In 2015, Björn joined AGCS in Munich, tasked with the global launch of its terrorism and political violence practice. In 2019, he became head of global political violence and hostile environment solutions, adding global responsibility for kidnap and ransom and evacuation and repatriation insurance to his roster. Björn holds an MBA, specialised in insurance management from the University of Applied Science in Cologne, and is a fellow of the Chartered Insurance Institute in London, as well as a certified insurance clerk by the Chamber of Commerce Offenbach am Main. And joining Björn to talk about strikes, riots and civil commotion, we have François Barriol, France manager and deputy head of Europe for terrorism, political violence and contingency for LSM, working from its Paris office. François joined LSM in 2021, but his first career was as an officer serving in the French Navy. He began his insurance career at Beazley in Paris in 2012, working in business development and then underwriting, launching lines of business such as contingency, kidnap and ransom, political violence and terrorism. He later joined Hiscox MGA to launch its war and terrorism division, focused on continental Europe and francophone countries in the Middle East and Africa, adding contingency to this. He then led a newly created crisis management division to help develop Hiscox K&R, piracy and crisis management solutions in France and Europe. François is also a lecturer on risk management and political risks at the University of Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne. He holds a Master's in Foreign Languages and International Relations from Catholic University in Lyon and an MSc in International Risk Management from HEC Paris. So we have two deeply knowledgeable subject matter experts and two really gripping topics. Sabotage is a huge topic in Europe this year, with heightened fears across the continent about state-backed sabotage, hybrid war, grey zone threats, amid a lively political backdrop. And SRCC is really a front and centre risk for political violence underwriters, particularly given the large and costly recent civil unrest events in the overseas French territories of New Caledonia, Guadeloupe, Martinique, as well as within France itself. So, that's enough for me. Let's get into it. Enjoy the conversation. François, Björn, thank you both for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, David.
Let's start off with some introductions. So, could you both take turns to provide an overview of the risks that you're underwriting today in a continental European context?
Yeah, sure. So we are writing the typical risks you would expect from political violence and terrorism underwriters. So we provide coverage against terrorism, SRCC, so strikes, riots, civil commotion, political violence, up to full-fledged civil war. These are our main products, and the main side products we are offering is terrorism liability, nuclear, chemical, biological, radiological coverage, and we also provide protection against event cancellation due to terrorism or the threat thereof. These are the main products we provide. And the extensions you will see from the property market, like denial of access, active assailant, all of these coverage are also provided by Liberty in Europe.
And perhaps in France as well, we can offer loss of attraction as a standalone product as well. That's something we can do as well, yeah.
For the standalone political violence and terrorism business, how would you describe the current appetite in Europe?
There is always this amount of inquiries we see for terrorism and sabotage, which has never changed over the last 20 years. So there's always this ground noise, which we're dealing with since years. The demand for war and the more specialized coverage as the political violence part of it has significantly increased over the last years. Prior to 2011, when the Arab Spring really kicked off, that was unheard of in Europe. Nobody knew about those products. This has changed over the last 14, 15 years. And particularly those companies with a very strong global footprint, they will buy that and they will ask for that, which makes sense, especially for the French book, which is clearly focusing on that part of our business.
This is an industry that loves acronyms, but when obviously you have war and you have PV and T, the terrorism. I mean, my understanding is whenever you say political violence, it's really the kind of broader coverage because it includes war, which people have been buying for a long time, and terrorism, which people have also been buying for a long time, but they've been seen as different products. And political violence, if my interpretation is right, that's a kind of broader coverage that unites them within one policy. Is that fair?
Absolutely. It's kind of the blanket cover, which covers the entire escalation phase from riots, from a terrorism attack, up to everything which happens in between, up to a full-fledged war. And it is specifically designed that, because we are talking about man-made risks, we have no physical definition of the perils. We are ensuring the action of persons, and we are ensuring the deliberate actions of persons. Therefore, all the definitions we have in our policies and the entire market in their policies is, to a certain extent, a blurred line. And it has to be like this.
Are you seeing a shift in the kinds of clients, the insureds, that are seeking cover for these types of risks?
In a certain way, we react on what's happening in the market. So over the past 5-6 years, we had not only the SRCC losses in Latin America, we had the same things happening in the US, we had the yellow vests in France as well, we had Martinique, French Overseas Department, New Caledonia.
Which we'll get into.
Yes, the list is huge. And in fact, so we are reacting on the basis of what's happening in the world, but also on how the property market is reacting. So this is in fact something of interest for us, because as soon as we can see some complexity on the property market, then this is a room of opportunity for us. So technically, the kind of new clients we've been seeing, well, retail has been a huge focus for us over the past 5-10 years, I would say, because those risks are becoming more and more complex.
And that's, your kind of downtown big department stores that maybe could find themselves on a protest route in a large urban centre, that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because if we have a look at what happened in France during the summer of 2023, then a police arrest that went wrong went into a lot of looting and opportunistic looting in Paris, for example. And this is something which was not that significant in the past. Something which used to be politically motivated, well, you could have an idea where it was going to take place, you knew how long in a certain way it could last, etc. But you've got more and more opportunistic actors on those kind of crises, which makes our job a bit more complex, but a bit even more interesting than ever before.
Great. Well, so we've actually got I'll just outline them first and we'll go into the first of them. So we'll start with state-sponsored sabotage, or I should say politically motivated sabotage, because there's not always a government behind it, and there's some grey zone stuff where perhaps it could be a government behind it, but it could also be, a front of, let's say, an activist group, for example, or it could just be an activist group. So yes, politically motivated sabotage. And I feel like sabotage is a recurring word on this podcast in recent months. It just seems to have risen in profile. So I'm really glad it's something you want to focus on today. I think from various conversations, it seems like is in focus, or it should be in focus. And we've seen increased concern over politically motivated sabotage across Europe. So, Björn, what are you observing in terms of the actors, the methods, and the motivations behind recent events?
I would like to start to say that sabotage is one of the best examples for the re-emerging risks. We're talking about emerging risks all the time, but this one is a re-emerging one, which we can actually see from the word sabotage itself. It comes from a French word, sabot, which is a wooden shoe, which has been thrown into machines in France to stop the machines by the people working in the factories.
The machine breakers. This is an 1800s industrial revolution. Is that where it comes from?
Yes, exactly. So it's nothing new. It has been happening all the time. It has been happening during all the centuries, during crisis. The perception of it depends on which side you are. Sabotage has always been a very effective means of asymmetric warfare from liberation fighters. So when you look at the recent history during World War II, I mean, the resistance in France fighting against the German occupation, that was sabotage at its best. We would not call it sabotage nowadays. We call it resistance for good reason. And when we are now looking at it, what's happening currently in Europe, you could easily say it's exactly that. It's asymmetric warfare. But if you have a closer look, it's a little bit more difficult and more complex because there are so many different actors using sabotage for communication with the masses. And some of them might or might not act on behalf or on order of states or state-sponsored. Some of them clearly don't. There are so many low-level, small-scale events mainly coming from left-wing, right-wing, fascist, xenophobic backgrounds, animal rights, environmental. I think it would be too easy to say they are all state-sponsored. But unfortunately, if you look at, I would say, the last 18 months, 24 months, there have been a couple of incidents which cannot be explained without ruling out a state-sponsored background. One of the most prominent clearly being the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which clearly was not done by some amateurs in a diving suit.
Attribution is obviously a really key point to this. So how are insurers and underwriters like yourself approaching attribution when it comes to sabotage, particularly when it's difficult to say whether something was state-sponsored or not?
That's a very, very good question, and it's currently one of the biggest discussions in the entire market. I think it's clearly for every underwriter to understand that an act of sabotage is clearly covered under a standard TNS, so terrorism and sabotage wording, like the LMA 3030.
Sabotage as terrorism is, before being an action, this is a modus operandi. So whether this is being sponsored by a state, whether this state is a good, bad, or whatever you want, this is just secondary importance. What the key question is, okay, you've got your pipeline, it has been blown up, we've got evidence. Who did that? I would say this is of secondary importance.
The sabotage itself is insured because we do not insure the mean of an attack. We always insure the motivation of an attack. And that covers religious, ideological, everything of that. The only area where it gets a little bit more difficult is when we are entering the warlike actions. Warlike actions is unfortunately not described in any way or form. It's not defined. So when we come back to our example of Nord Stream 2, is an undercover operation like this, is that a warlike action? This is where it becomes actually the only area where I would think that further investigation, further clarification on the wording side is needed. The sabotage itself is 100% insured. No doubt about that.
We already touched on the PV, political violence, being an overarching broader cover than, for example, terrorism wordings or war risk policies that have also existed for some time. So for a buyer, is there more kind of peace of mind that when defining an event, is that warlike or not, it's going to be covered under PV?
Correct. So sabotage per se is covered under the standalone terrorism wording as well. But if you have a full political violence insurance product, the attribution to or coming close to a warlike operation doesn't actually makes no difference because you have board cover for warlike actions as well. So to answer your question very shortly, it is a big benefit to the client to buy that extended full political violence product, because then there is less gray area and more clarity.
Because these acts of sabotage are what's being talked about as grey zone risks or hybrid war risks, short of war but clearly orchestrated in many cases. Do you think that current market definitions and covers are keeping pace with evolving reality?
Another good question. I mean, the insurance business is a reactive business. We are not inventing stuff. We are following the risks and we react to risks which are threatening our clients. So I think it's absolutely crucial that our industry continuously further develops and refines and sometimes even changes definitions. But I don't think that clients in the current state of the market are left alone with a risk they want to insure. You will find the solutions you need at the moment, particularly for sabotage.
Do you see a trend towards higher frequency, low cost events? And if so, how are you evaluating the threat landscape for these, unconventional tactics?
We have seen exactly the same for terrorism since a couple of years. We have seen those knife-wielding attacks. We have seen vehicle-borne attacks, REM raids, unfortunately.
In France and Germany, yeah.
Everywhere in Europe and unfortunately everywhere in the world. And yes, we do see the same for sabotage. In Germany in particular, we have seen over years and years and years arson attacks on parked police cars, on installations of the Deutsche Telekom, so the German telecom provider, on installation of Deutsche Bahn, so the German railway system. This is absolutely, unfortunately, the new normal. And the insurance market, if they have to deal with those micro events, is paying them. Unfortunately, some of these events are well below any agreed deductibles, so that our clients need to bear themselves. But if there is a bigger event, absolutely, they are paid on a regular basis.
François, so this is over to your part of the conversation. So strikes, riots, civil commotion in French overseas territories. We've seen several instances of this in recent times. So French overseas territories, overseas France. What's your assessment of the current SRCC risk environment in places like New Caledonia, Guadeloupe, Martinique?
New Caledonia, French overseas departments such as Guadeloupe, such as Martinique, for example, have been under the spotlight over the past few years for obvious reasons, because, for example, the New Caledonian losses are estimated in the region of 2 billion. 1 million should fall into the insurance market, so we are talking about significant numbers. However, we should not neglect also what's happening in France for the moment, because just back in time, 6 months ago, 1 year ago, we had severe losses as well from SRCCs in France. And interestingly, this is something that we would expect to happen again because, well, some of the root causes have not been tackled with, such as the political instability. Just to give you an idea, we've had 4 different governments since the beginning of 2024. We are in 2025, so it gives you an idea of the political situation in France. At the same time, we have problems with the financing the debts. So that's another issue. So all of those things create some fertile ground for turmoil. And in fact, every sparkle can trigger a fire. If we have a look at what's happened in France, then a police arrest went wrong, and then we had 15 days of riots all across France. So that's interesting because, in fact, it costs to insurance companies, according to the French Insurance Federation, we are expecting it to cost in the region of 800 million euros for 15 days. If we have a look at what happened in the Guadeloupe and in Martinique, then what triggered that situation was, in fact, the price of commodities, price of food, purchasing powers. So we're talking about very obvious things. And in New Caledonia, we had even a more complex situation because it was a mix between ethnic tensions and the reform of the voting systems. So all in all, you've got this fertile ground for riots. So technically, we would not be expecting any improvement or significant improvement in the short terms. And if you also had on top of that, the fact that we have been observing some foreign influence on those contexts, then it gives you an idea of all the things we can expect for France in the future. I'm going to give you two concrete examples. The first one was France has the largest Jewish and Muslim communities in Europe. So technically, everything that's happening in the Middle East has immediate consequences in France. And so Russia has been suspected in several occasions to fuel the fire with hostile acts, with large-scale communications. One of the concrete examples was vandalism of the Jewish memorial in Paris. Some people were arrested. So it gives you an idea of the kind of situation we have been living in. And another one, which is a bit more tricky, is the state-sponsored interference from some foreign countries. One of them being the Baku Initiative Group, which is sponsored by Azerbaijan. And interestingly, those guys have been concentrating their efforts under the name of the NGOs. They have been concentrating their efforts against 10 territories. 9 of them are belonging to France. So it gives you an idea of who could be next in terms of riots.
You've already referenced some of the previous events. Have those losses changed how insurers view these regions of overseas France? So how has pricing or capacity shifted? And are they still insurable?
Traditionally, the SRCC perils have been insured under the all-risk policies. So we are reacting to what the trend is on the property market. And since the appetite has been decreasing because of substantial losses on the property side, then we have seen this kind of new increase, new trends in terms of submissions and in terms of risks. So to give you an example again, some insurers, property insurers I mean, decided to sublimit SRCCs in the French Overseas Department. Some others decided even to remove totally the capacity for these specific perils. And I think there even was one carrier who decided to literally put the pen down for everything related to retail location, luxury, bankings, even some industrial locations. And interestingly also, this is not something totally new because it does echo with what France and French municipalities public buildings had been facing back in 2023, just after the riots. So to answer your question, yes, this is still insurable, but in a different way. So when our clients are approaching the specialty PVT market, political violence and terrorism markets, then they are looking for something which is different from what they will expect from the property market. So we can offer coverage for this, but we will see the questions differently based on the industry profile of our insured. And ultimately, so depending on the self-insured retention, depending on the profile of our clients, the contingency plans that they have, we will find different kind of solutions, because still we know that as an insurance company, or one of our roles is to be committed to support the economy. So the idea for us is to find an adequate decision and solution which both fits the clients, the brokers, and ourselves.
So let's continue on this theme of different profile clients and also shift in buying behaviours. This is a trend that we see in other parts of the world too. So, I mean, Chile, obviously, with a big SRCC event in 2019, I think it started. Obviously, that went on for over a year of protests. And that wasn't a PV market before then, but it was afterwards, precisely because the all-risk property insurers moved to exclude it or limit and it obviously shifted towards the specialty market. So it does seem like we're seeing the same sort of trend in terms of buying behaviour, or driven by what the commoditized insurers are doing. Are you seeing shifts in buyer behaviour for the kinds of businesses seeking protection and the types of submissions that are coming in?
Well, if we noticed a new trend and a new interest, especially from small retail profiles or industries, for example, we've been approached for very small shops, which are risks we did not see in the past. So this is interesting. However, the main trend, in fact, for us is, well, our clients used to be quite sensitive to this kind of issues in the past, and it's precisely because they, as you mentioned, because they had some losses in Chile, in the USA during Black Lives Matters. They have been experiencing this kind of losses in the past. So technically, the level of maturity is already quite high into our book of business.
So you said for shops, but I would expect multinationals to be looking at this, but small and medium-sized businesses.
Well, they are approaching the specialty market when they don't find any solution on the PV market. Sometimes we try also to sell this kind of products as a separate capacity because, for example, the clients approaching the property market are really concerned about the standard losses that could be flooding, that could be fire, that could be destruction, machinery breakdown. And so technically, as we are talking about something where we are expecting to see less attritionality but more severity, such as riots, then one argument we can use is to say to those guys, well, you've got the possibility to get a second capacity on a separate policy. And then if you've got riots, then you're going to be insured under this specialty policy and you will not damage another policy. So you will have potentially more leverage when it will be time for questioning your renewal. Most of the time, those approaching, those small and medium shops approaching us have had negative experience of the property market, which means, in fact, that they had either sublimits into their coverage. So technically, they want to have more capacity because their perception of the risk is much higher than what they are being offered as a coverage in the property. Or alternatively, is because they didn't find any solution.
I'm prone to seeing things from a London market view perspective sometimes. So for the French market and some of those big clients on the book, what is most driving them? What are their biggest concerns, do you think?
What's changed in the largest account that we've been insuring for more than 10 years already is really the management of the supply chain. So our clients are more and more seeking to secure their operating models. They are really concerned about how political violence perils in one of their subsidiaries could have an impact on their entire operating model. So they're also trying to work on reducing the vulnerabilities and their dependencies towards a certain kind of suppliers, certain kind of clients. So in fact, that's very interesting because this is in fact a real consequence from, I would say, the ashes from 2022. So technically, since we've just moved into something like more a non-conventional hybrid warfare climate, I would say, then potentially all clients have been really seeing the world in a very different way. So they have been able to adapt to this new market, to this new world, because they are at the forefront of what's happening in the world. So this is very interesting, and we are being asked to go into even more scrutiny than ever before. And interestingly, a new trend also is, we can quite easily sit around the table with a client, with a broker, and discuss about the risk to find a bespoke and tailor-made solution.
And that's all for now for this special episode, in association with Liberty Specialty Markets. I've been your host, David Benyon, and I'd like to thank my two wonderful guests, Björn Reusswig and François Barriol. Production was by Peter McGill, Lawrence Durkin made the music.